Good afternoon and welcome to today's event, Road to the Summit, A Digital Future for the Americas. I'm Jason Marzak, Senior Director of the Atlantic Council's Adrian Arsht Latin America Center. As all of you know very well, in just over 2 weeks, the United States will host President Biden's high priority event for the Western Hemisphere, and frankly, one of the most consequential moments for the Western Hemisphere, the Summit of the Americas. This upcoming 9th Summit is an opportunity to reflect on our previous commitments and progress, reset priorities in response to emerging challenges, and also to renew hemispheric collaboration. Last September, the Adrian Arsht Latin America Center launched a partnership with the U.S. Department of State to further advance this historic event. Over the past months, we've held a series of policy-oriented public discussions on summit themes: democracy and governance, health and climate resilience, green and equitable growth, and are now wrapping this campaign up with this event on digitalization. These public discussions serve to generate consensus on top priorities, amplify diverse perspectives, and also produce tangible recommendations to make the 9th Summit as productive and inclusive as possible. This is a significant endeavor. We immediately recognize the importance of working closely with our existing networks in the region, but also forge new partnerships with communities and actors with whom we haven't necessarily connected with in the past. Today, we look toward regional digitalization as a transformative opportunity and significant challenge for growth and inclusion in Latin America and the Caribbean. The questions and conversations you will hear throughout this event have emerged from sustained engagement with our partners across the region and through individual consultations and strategy sessions. I'm particularly delighted to host leaders today, such as Representative Debbie Mercarsel-Powell, President Biden's Special Advisor on the Summit of the Americas, and also Dr. Kassan Troop, Acting Chief Education Officer at the Ministry of Education and Youth of Jamaica. Also joining today's discussions are stakeholders from the Inter-American Development Bank, Millicom, Mastercard, Amazon Web Services, Falabella, and others. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, the topic of digitalization has grown in importance over the past couple of years as key services like education and healthcare went online during the pandemic and consumers adopted digital payment technologies. These shifts also highlight regional inequalities. About 240 million residents of Latin America and the Caribbean lacked internet connections before COVID struck, and nearly half of the region remains unbanked. By convening leaders to discuss and address the strategies for fostering inclusive growth through new technologies, we hope to leverage our panelists' experience in the public and private sectors to begin to bridge even further some of these gaps. Now, as a reminder, on a housekeeping note, we are offering simultaneous translation of today's event. For audio interpretation in English, Spanish, or Portuguese, viewers can click on the globe icon on the lower right of your Zoom screen and then select the relevant language. For simultaneous closed captioning, you can click on the links that our team is currently dropping in the chat function of the Zoom. I'd now like to welcome Special Advisor Debbie Mercarsel-Powell, who is the Special Advisor for the Summit from the United States and also a former Congresswoman from Florida. Special Advisor Mercarsel-Powell, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Jason, and thank you to the Atlantic Council for being such a strong and wonderful partner, allowing for these forums and conversations.
Well, thank you so much. And I know you're joining us from Miami. Great that you're taking the time at this really important moment for this critical discussion, because we're now just 2 weeks away, just over 2 weeks from the start of the summit in Los Angeles. As a special advisor for the summit, what insights can you share with our audience about the Biden administration's priorities for this historic gathering?
Yeah, Jason, look, like you said, the summit is only 2 weeks away, and when the hemisphere comes together in Los Angeles in June, our region's governments are going to be addressing the 5 focus areas and making political commitments around these areas, which you mentioned earlier. It's increasing health and pandemic resilience, strengthening democracy, building our green future, fostering clean energy transitions, and accelerating digital transformation. The theme that was selected by the Biden-Harris administration, building a sustainable, resilient, and equitable future, is built around the thought that the 9th Summit needs to respond to our hemisphere's most pressing issues. We've gone through a terrible, terrible pandemic, COVID-19, and it really exposed the cracks on our health, economic, education, and social systems. And so we need to address these issues. The lack of equitable access to economic, social, and political opportunities is on the table. Governments and stakeholders have told us that the summit has to respond to the main needs of the people in the hemisphere and to help them be able to access opportunities for all, to create equal opportunities for all the citizens of the region. So having these type of conversations, I've been meeting with so many different stakeholders, really inform us on the things that we need to ensure are included in these conversations as it relates to digital transformation. Jason, we are going to pursue, the summit will pursue a first ever regional agenda that's going to be centered around our shared support for democracy and human rights. We know that we need to expand access to digital technology so that we can ensure that growth is equitable and inclusive. Our shared future is digital, as you can imagine, and our ability as a region to compete and succeed increasingly depends on making sure that we define this shared vision on how we're going to foster digital ecosystems that will be able to connect people and also improve their lives.
Thank you so much. One of the things you mentioned is that the summit needs to respond to the needs of the people, and you've been having a number of public and private conversations to prepare for the summit. What have you been hearing insofar as the most salient and insightful takeaways from these discussions? What have you been hearing that people really want to actually have tangibly come out of this important gathering?
Yeah, the overlying theme that I hear, whether it's from government leaders, members of civil society, the private sector, is really how do we recover after this pandemic hit our economy so hard? What do we need to do to provide economic opportunities? What type of lessons have we learned? But at the same time, what are the innovative ways that we can actually provide easier access to financing, support more than 165 million young Americans that are entering the labor force? What do we need to do to protect democratic institutions to allow this to happen? So the issue of digitalization is actually tied to all of that, right? We know that the potential to expand connectivity and internet access is really going to build that bridge, close that gap that we have to internet access. So a lot of people have been left behind, especially after the pandemic. What you mentioned earlier, about 30% of the population in this hemisphere had no access to the internet. So we need to address together the same issues that we have here in the United States. How are we going to provide online connectivity to rural communities, while at the same time protecting citizens' data? That's key. That's a key issue in order to protect privacy and data. How are we going to allow technologies to help promote economic and social inclusion without making the inequality worse? Over the past few years, governments really have worked to address the digital divide, increasing connectivity as 4G expands in nearly every country, and is creating conditions to attract growing venture capital flows to major hubs in the region. We are seeing that there's growth in e-commerce region-wide. We are also seeing growing entrepreneurial centers that are holding really these opportunities to serve as a great launching pad for startups and innovative businesses. But as you can imagine, we can't do this without really looking at how this could affect democracy and also security. The Western Hemisphere has to map out how we're going to be able to achieve these goals, but also how are we going to secure these networks? We need to make sure, governments all over the region need to make sure that 5G equipment and software are not going to introduce risks that can threaten national security. Citizens need to trust that using 5G networks are not going to threaten or compromise their dignity, human rights, financial security, or their privacy. So we have to really come together in the summit to lay out the standards for these new technologies that will allow for secure connections and also provide opportunities for everyone to be connected.
Thank you. That's excellent. You know, this of course, you mentioned this event is of course focused on the future of digitalization in the Americas. You also just recently joined us for a live conversation over WhatsApp with 200 civil society leaders from Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua, where you responded to audience questions through voice messages. And through this discussion, you also use digital tools to reach disconnected communities on the region. You just highlighted a few different digital priorities as part of the summit, but I'd like to ask you to further elaborate on why you see digital transformation so key to, as you said before, addressing the needs of the people across the hemisphere, and also what are some other innovative opportunities that the United States seeks to put forward at the summit specifically to address digitalization and digital inclusion?
Yeah, Jason, you mentioned something that has been actually the most impactful forum or conversation that I've had the fortune of being involved in. And it was that conversation that you mentioned through WhatsApp. That was last week. And we had a conversation with over 250 Cubans and Venezuelans that were there in their home countries, where the only access to connecting with others outside of the island of Cuba or the country of Venezuela was through this type of technology. So I have to say that that was a really powerful reminder on how important it is to provide innovative ways to empower citizens in their countries to have access to different networks and different settings for them to be able to communicate outside of their region. Throughout the summit, we really have learned that these innovative technologies are going to be able to reach these diverse audiences. I can say that what they wanted the most was to be able to tell all of us through the summit process that they are asking for support in their fight for human rights. They're asking for advice on how they can actually fight the violation of their rights in their home countries. They are asking for ways where they can actually participate more directly, either in the political process or communicating with other countries through the summit process. So the WhatsApp conversation is just one example of the efforts that we've made to engage stakeholders from all over the region. I can tell you that as special advisor, I really look forward to working alongside partners from every single country in this region, whether they're government leaders, members of the private sector, or also civil society stakeholders, because they really need to understand the power of technology so that they can create a more powerful and a more prosperous society for their citizens and for their communities. I'm excited that you're having this, and I'm going to be really curious to hear what other ideas come about from this forum, particularly as we try to empower citizens to be connected so that they have opportunities to thrive.
And just as a follow-up, what you mentioned earlier, standards insofar as 5G as being something that you see as a priority to come out of the summit, alignment on those standards. Are there other areas within digitalization, digital inclusion? We were just talking just now about the WhatsApp chat with stakeholders from Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, and the idea of digitalization as being a real tool for empowerment of democracy. Are there other specific deliverables on the digital front that you're really hoping to achieve as part of the summit?
Well, one of the areas that people tend to forget that as we talk about higher access, higher connectivity, the issue of disinformation is really a conversation that is going to be included as part of the summit that really needs to be a part of the conversation as we create more opportunities to access information online or through social media. The type of disinformation that we're seeing right now, and it's interesting, and I bring this up now because when I was having the WhatsApp conversation last week, I could immediately tell that there were a couple of people that had joined that conversation that were already starting to try and divide the conversation and try to sway what we were discussing, whether it was human rights or connectivity issues. They were already trying to divide the conversation on issues that are hot, that are divisive. So this is a real problem that we're having as we talk about protecting democratic institutions, protecting democratic governance. How do we together, whether it's government leaders, academia, journalists, the press, how do we work together to ensure that we are providing education for people that are going to start having access to the internet, to having access to 4G, 5G technologies, whatever that may be in their countries? How do we provide them with the tools so that they can immediately respond to any sort of disinformation that is targeted to them? We know that this is not a threat not only to our democracy, but it's created a real issue of vaccine hesitancy. So this is all connected to the mission of ensuring that we're building a resilient hemisphere for whether we have another pandemic or whatever external forces may come about that would threaten our region.
Well, thank you. Well, I want to shift to a personal note, because the summit was going to highlight the importance of the U.S. relationship with our partners in the region. Of course, you were born in Ecuador. You're a champion for Latinos in the United States, and you've also worked to ensure equal pay for Latino women in the country. You've also led the charge on legislation to provide direct aid to Venezuelan communities across the region. So, on a personal note, how do you see the summit as an opportunity to extend solidarity across the Americas and also strengthen the inclusion of diaspora communities in the broader agenda for the region?
Yeah, Jason, it's so interesting because what we discuss here domestically in the country as issues that are important to all of us, whether it's providing opportunities for those that are feeling left behind, whether it's empowering women in the political process, providing resources so that our young Americans can actually become empowered to participate in the labor market. Those are all the same issues that I hear from different stakeholders all over the hemisphere. And we forget that we're so interconnected and that there's so much talent and resources available to us here at home, but to the entire hemisphere by working together, that those are issues that we need to bring together in June in Los Angeles. I'm excited to see the incredible talent that the region is building as it pertains to entrepreneurship, innovative ways to connect their communities. We've seen young Americans that have been able to provide through grants from the Young Americans Business Forum that have been able to provide connectivity in their rural communities. So for me, it's an opportunity to bring the voices of our citizens together so that the heads of government, the people that are going to be participating, whether in government, understand that it is their responsibility to deliver, to show that democracy works for the citizens of the region, that they will be creating a more inclusive and equitable social and political network for their citizens, that together they can actually address the most challenging issues, which is the recovery after the COVID pandemic or the migration issues that we've seen, not just here in the US border, but also in countries like in Colombia and Peru and Brazil and Ecuador. So I am optimistic. I'm really, really excited because we are going to build the most inclusive summit that we've built to date. And I suspect that the deliverables are going to be ones that we really need to implement, that will bring our hemisphere where it needs to be so that we're protected for any other threats that may come, whether it's a public health threat or whether it's a security threat.
I want to go back to what the deliverables and kind of and what the follow-up. And I think that's important because in our last virtual event, Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti joined us and to talk about how he saw for the city of Los Angeles as the host city, the follow-up from the summit over the course of the next year. What do you see? What are your goals, and what do you see as what should be U.S. priorities for this year of action, and how can the summit really catalyze those discussions moving forward? Because I think it's important, incredibly important to note, as you're saying, that the summit is not the conclusion. I mean, the summit is an important moment to further catalyze the conversations, the agreements, the discussions, in order to advance on those on the implementation after the summit. So, how do you see that year of summit commitment implementation?
Yeah, and Jason, Senator Chris Dodd, who's also a special advisor to the summit, and myself, when we talk to the White House, when we talk to all our partners, we are continuously reminding all of them that in order for us to have a successful summit, that year of action is going to be key. We need to ensure that we implement all those political commitments that come out of the summit. So there are going to be different areas. I can say that we are already in discussion of planning different meetings that are going to come after the summit, whether it's a meeting of different cities to see how they can be involved in the implementation process, whether it's a meeting of the private sector as they're trying to make further investments in either manufacturing, health resiliency in different areas of the region in South America and Central America, whether it's meeting with different heads of government to ensure that there are strong partnerships as it pertains to trade and financing and economic prosperity. That year is going to be key. For us to say that we've had a successful summit, it doesn't end June 10th. It's going to really be looking at what comes after the summit. And we're already in the planning process. Those discussions are already taking place. And I can assure you, and hopefully you'll be a part of that as well in the next year.
Well, we're as we start off the conversation, thank you very much. I think it's very important to note the follow-on for the summit, and of course, happy for the Atlantic Council to be part of that follow-on as well. As we're looking at just over 2 weeks, there's a lot of questions about kind of what still is kind of has to be accomplished in the next couple of weeks. What do you see what are your top priorities to get from now to Los Angeles?
Well, my main goal is inclusion of the voices of our diaspora community here domestically. And I can tell you that my heart always has a weak spot for the Young Americans Business Forum. So I've had several conversations with those groups. The priority for me is any type of input that I'm getting right now, and I'm getting a lot of it, you can imagine, from all areas. I want to look at ways that we can include those voices in the summit, even though it's going to be more difficult for people to participate in person. There are going to be different ways that people can actually participate online. I am trying to figure out ways, and since we're talking about digitalization and connectivity, in ways that we can actually hear those voices live during some of these sessions that week of June 10th, and ensuring that the center of the summit always remains the focus, protecting democracy and democratic governance. We're not going to be able to achieve these goals if we don't have trust in our institutions, if we don't have stability, if we don't have safety. The issue of security also is one that needs to be addressed. So it's inclusion and protecting the core principle of the summit, democracy and democratic governance.
Well, I want to thank you so much, Special Advisor Macarsopalo, for joining today's conversation. Wish you all the best in the next couple of weeks as we head toward Los Angeles, and look forward to continuing to follow your work as we're leading up there, and as you mentioned as well, the work that comes out of the summit and the implementation of the many summit commitments. I want to now turn it over to Larissa Walcott, the moderator of our first panel, which will be focused on access to digital tools. Larissa is a senior fellow at the Brazilian Center for International Relations, one of our institutional partners, as well as a partner at VIA and former advisor on China to the Minister of Agriculture of Brazil. Larissa, over to you.
Thank you, Jason. We're very glad to be here. Thank you for having me as a moderator for this panel. We will be talking about access to digital infrastructure and tools. And I'm speaking to you from Brasilia, the capital of Brazil. I'm very honored to have as speakers in our panel, Dr. Kazan Troop, Chief Education Officer at the Jamaican Ministry of Education and Youth, together with Mrs. Giuseppina Corelli, Director of Political Relations at Millicom. So those will be the two speakers that in our panel this afternoon, and I would like to welcome them in joining us in this panel today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It is a pleasure.
Thank you to you both. So I'll start with you, Dr. Kazan. So the COVID-19 pandemic hastened a digital transition across the world as education, commerce, and the healthcare providers had to move online. The Jamaican Ministry of Education championed initiatives to ensure equitable access to online tools, such as the Own Your Own Device program. Can you describe Jamaica's progress in bridging the digital divide? And do you have any lessons that could be replicated across the region? Thank you, please.
Okay, thank you so much for having me. I am proud to report that Jamaica has had a steady progress in trying to bridge the digital divide here in our country. When COVID started, it was a startling revelation for us. This is something that we have never had to treat with the full closure of our schools. And so we had to find an opportunity to continue learning within the pandemic. What we did here in Jamaica is to survey our system quickly. And we found out that within our system, we had approximately 18,000 devices that included laptops, desktops, and tablets in our school system. And we recognized that students who were sent home needed access to these devices. So we had to quickly change our policy guidelines here in Jamaica. And we instructed our principals and board chairmen to make these devices quickly available to our students. Then, of course, in Jamaica, we have what we call our social protection program, our pathway program for students who are on the program of advancement through health and education. Those are students who are needy. And so we had to prioritize those students as well. And so we had to look at the students who were preparing for their transitional assessments, because those students would have to move on to higher programs of learning. And so we had to make sure that those students were provided for. So what we did quickly was to procure tablets for those students in our grades 4 to 6. We procured 40,000 tablets for those students. And then we moved into another quick procurement to provide 15,000 laptops to the older students. Those are students in grades 10, 11, 12, and 13. Those are again at the higher end of our secondary level. So that's what we had to do in Jamaica. And then of course, through the initiative of our minister, we rolled out our own your own device and one laptop per child program, where we called upon our private sector, our members in the diaspora to assist by providing resources so we could provide devices to our students. And of course, we also expanded through our own your own device program, another access to 36,000 devices for families who were not on our social protection established program, but who were in need. And so we also used that facility to provide another access to students. So we, in essence, we have provided to date approximately 195,000 devices into the system to ensure that our students could access learning. And beyond that, we had to provide access to the internet, which was another challenge here in Jamaica. When we closed schools, we recognized that we had approximately 24% of our schools that never had access to the internet. So we had to go into rapid procurement again to procure those services centrally, so those schools could be provided with the internet access, and also went into a partnership with our internet service provider to provide reverse billing. So those students who had devices but never had funding to access the internet could access the internet, and we paid for that centrally for students and teachers. So that's the kind of progress that we have been making here in Jamaica. Some of the lessons learned, we really realize that equity has to be paramount. It is not something that you need to react to. You need to be proactive about. You need to know the landscape of your country, and you need to plan for that. So that has been something that has become first and foremost in how we design our model of education. We also learned that there are successful practices. So learning communities are very important. Sharing with your neighbors what is happening in your country, what they're doing. We can learn from them, so we don't need to reinvent the wheel. And most importantly, your budget for education must be aligned and reallocated. You must have some flexibility, but must be aligned to the equity thrust, which is greatly important if we're going to bridge the digital divide and if we're going to improve the social and economic realities of all our children and families.
Excellent, Dr. Kazan. Very impressive numbers. And I also like the idea that you're able to engage with the diaspora. That's very interesting. Make people accountable to help change their country as well, even if they're not there. That's excellent. So as a follow-up question, I would like your view on how has the wave of digitalization impacted human capital development in the region, and what opportunities can greater online connectivity provide for future generations? Please, Dr. Kazan.
Well, from my experience here in Jamaica, we have seen tremendous impact with our human capital development with respect to improve capabilities of our teachers. We have seen over 25,000 teachers here in Jamaica. And what we witness here is the passion and interest in growing as an individual, as a professional. So our teachers were willing to put themselves out there to unlearn and to learn and to relearn. So we have seen massive improvement in capabilities of our teachers in offering or delivering digitalized education, distance education, whatever you want to call it. But that is something that we are proud of here in Jamaica because of the passion that we saw from our teachers, the willingness, and of course, the partnership that we got from international donors and our private partners to support us in building out the capacities locally to facilitate that kind of trading. So we had to put the platforms in place. We had to partner with our international partners to provide trainers from overseas for us. So in terms of the capabilities, we have seen tremendous improvement in human capital. And as I've said earlier, in terms of access to resources, that has been a tremendous improvement that we have seen, because part of human capital development is not just the training, but the resources that we have provided. And since then, we have progressed into moving away from just providing tablets for teachers, but in terms of providing laptops for teachers. So throughout the pandemic, as we transition, we have provided approximately 9,000 laptops assigned to teachers, and we are progressing into this year, providing another 8,000. Our goal is to provide laptops for all teachers. And of course, part of the human capital development that we have seen is the building out of our labs. You know, our schools, we started a thrust here in Jamaica to build out our ICT labs in our school. That is ongoing, and that's part of the human capital development. So when we talk about improved capabilities, improved access to resources, and most importantly, we are anticipating improved performance from our teachers and our students as we continue to deliver education here in Jamaica.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Kazan. And Josephine, I'd like to ask you the same question. So how do you see this impact on human capital development in the region? What opportunities are there?
Marisa, thank you very much. And I want to again spend a couple of words to thank the Atlantic Council for this initiative and the most distinguished fellow panelists I'm sharing the discussion with. Definitely humbling, definitely spectacular to see what kind of achievements can be done with commitment. No? From the telco operator operating in the region for about 3 decades now, as Millicom does with over 50 million customers serving right now, definitely we experimented and we experienced what I guess every single stakeholder in the value chain has experienced with the wave of the pandemic. What we want to take away from it is, of course, our dedication from the communities. It is no secret. Connecting communities is definitely what leads our work as a provider and as a member of a sustainable ecosystem we're trying to build in the region. No? And of course, the dedication to the communities, we live it firsthand and every day through our programs, online and digital education programs that we carry out in the 9 countries. No? So definitely, we were always believers in the opportunities of connectivity because it brings more access to, enhanced professional opportunities, of course, education. Of course, right now, as we saw it in the pandemic, it can also catalyze more access to, public services or even healthcare. So definitely regarding capacity building, these are all fields which are now definitely more connected, more available, more interacting. And in the sense of really education programs, we witnessed something that was very specific that I'd love to share with the rest of the attendants. And so we run programs dedicated especially for women. No? Our program Conectadas on the 28th of April, after 4 years of activities in person and after basically training over 570,000 women, we decided to launch an online platform for it because we aspire to also have any woman in the region logging and trying to learn about financial management activities and social media and digital tools for both personal and professional ventures, let's say. No? But the example I want to bring up is one that's been long running as well, since about 2018, and that is dedicated to teachers. It's called Maestros Conectados, and that is a program which during the pandemic, it's basically empowering every mentorship. It's not only really teaching community, on how to communicate, engage, teach, really share ideas and really engage the students through digital tools. No, we organized a congress, an online 2-day congress in November 2021, and it gathered about 40,000 people, 42,000 participants, which over the 2 days from 22 countries. I want to say it wasn't only, let's say, it really went beyond our wildest aspirations of engaging mentorships from the region. What do we, of course, get out from this? We are offering to a traditional profession an opportunity, first of all, to be more capillary, to reach a new audience. And then we're also giving that audience that might be in a rural area, as has been mentioned already in the opening remarks, which might be in an area which for democratic features does not allow for the establishment of a school, allows these people to, upskill and learn, and be educated. And of course, there's one aspect which is really important is connecting these new communities in these small realities where we operate, as we call them, the hidden gems. I've seen our CEO is very adamant in this definition. No, we need to keep in mind the local reality. We need to keep in mind the difference. Central America, especially, is not Argentina, is not Mexico. It doesn't have the numbers, the size of your beautiful Brazil. So we need to take into consideration that these are all opportunities that we're giving. We are untapping potential. We are absolutely catalyzing a very young population, a very educated population to just, participate in the recovery and the growth of their own, social and economic environments, in this country. So definitely, not only future generations, but I think over 162 million citizens of this part of the world, which are between 15 and 29, this is the moment, and it's definitely the moment for joining forces. This is not a single stunt show, definitely not. This is something that needs to be done, listening and detecting the exact social needs of every area. Needs to be done with an active participation and dialogue, of course, between the private and the public sector. But opportunities there for this greater connectivity you're mentioning are definitely in the hands of a shared vision of a viable environment for us, for continuing deploying high quality infrastructure, of course, and keeping on connecting with a long-term vision all of these communities, because it's a pool of opportunities, definitely.
Excellent, Giuseppina. And moving forward, should we view digital access as a public good? And what are the policy implications of this approach for the business sector?
I do support that thrust. Digital access is definitely, it's almost like infusing that or embedding your education model in a digitized space. That's critical to what the 21st century demands. And so the education system and the workforce must be inextricably linked. One must be feeding into the other, because what you want is your education system to providing students who can transform and contribute to the workspace. So it must be relevant. Your outputs from your education system must be relevant to what is happening in your country. So the plan for your country is going to be realized by the plan of the education sector. So the digital services, the digitalization of the system is absolutely critical, because you want to get students who are ready for that kind of transformation. So there needs to be constant communication, therefore, between the public sector, the working environment, and the education system. What is it that the workforce demands? And how do we feed that back into the design of our curriculum? So that's the kind of connection I'm talking about. So one cannot work without the other. And also for our work world, the working space, to contribute to the development of the learning environment. So we want to make sure that what the students are exposed to in the learning environment is similar to what they will be working in. So the workspace must work to make facilities, their own facilities, available through furloughs, through work experience initiative, through constant dialogue where we can have innovative conversations about what needs to happen in education. So what that really means is that there needs to be policy. The policy guidelines must be aligned. What the country is working towards must be what the education system is working towards. That is what is going to take to have that kind of synergy and the natural fit towards a social and economic transformation that you desire in your country. So that's very, very important for me. And therefore it means that that should be the thrust. Every education system must work towards digitizing their human and resource management system, digitizing their educational management system. So you can have constant communication, you can track progress, you can be informed on the go as to what is it that your system needs, what is it that the workplace needs, and how can you be agile and flexible to make that change so that your students can be relevant and can be innovative and contribute to that transformation. It's very, very important.
Thank you, Dr. Kazan. Giuseppina, would you like to comment on the relation with the business sector?
From the business sector, I have to do the work behind the scenes, no? So we do appreciate the results, and we certainly are all connected and all aware. All of this is happening because of that jump in digitalization. Networks got loaded 40% more overnight. We need to remember this at a global level. So it's been an effort for everybody. But from the standpoint of a telco operator, I want to bring up 2 points which are relevant, I think, and I'm up definitely for discussion in that sense. But definitely investment is key in our sector. And in the telco segment, I think it's the only one among major infrastructure. The operator cares about 80% of this weight. I just want to say that, if we think about an access, access as public good, and it's lovely that I have the opportunity of Dr. Kazan here. I don't think a Ministry of Education could do it alone. As much as a telco operator, without a policy guidance, without, of course, government dialogue, of course, the adequate policy and regulatory framework could not do it. So it is important in that sense that for us in this moment, for I guess all the operators in the field, it is definitely fundamental that we are all together fostering an environment for investment, for upgrades, for updates, for new and innovative solutions for different areas, so to enhance connectivity and for it to be available in that sense to the public and broader and everyday wider and so diverse audience. No, so of course through that there's a number of issues that we discuss. Would we want to see a more harmonized spectrum pricing, the duration of licensing? How do we use the universal service fund? Do we bring it back to the sector and do we use it directly? So it's definitely a conversation, fiscal policy. There's a number of things that definitely involve a series of stakeholders, but that, in the future will need to be shared and will need to allow for the deployment of the best infrastructure, for the tailor-made infrastructure, and not just something that it's unmovable or that just simply will not be able to provide the access and the connectivity to these groups, which change, grow, and have different demands by the minute, literally. So, and I want to remind, when this conversation started, which I guess one of the very first documents about it was the Council of Human Rights of the United Nations. It was 2011 when this was discussed. And in the report that was actually presented in May, the conversation was, this needs to be a process for the public good, but it needs to be agreed and led and steered by both private and public sectors. This is something that definitely we need to work on together. And of course, needs to have that reality check of the need for tailor-made infrastructure and for capillarity, and that is definitely something that is an effort that as operators carry out. But we need, of course, certain assurances and be free to invest in that sense and promote that environment. For just a shared one for everybody to chip into this effort.
Excellent. It's always important to have this public-private sector alignment, right?
Definitely.
And as we head to the end of this very vibrant female panel, which I'm very honored to moderate, I will give you, unfortunately, only 30 seconds each because we're running late, but I would like both of you to comment on what you would like to see leaders make, what kind of commitments should the leaders make at the summit to advance equitable access to digital tools. So 30 seconds to each of you. Dr. Kazan, please.
Well, of course, partnerships are very, very important. So we need leaders in the sector to identify partners, persons who are willing to commit to the thrust of equity. That must be paramount as we go forward for this conference coming up. And therefore, in identifying resources and pulling those together so countries can benefit, that is very, very important. That has to be paramount because there's no one pillar that can make this happen. It has to be a partnership. So partnership is very, very important. And just a commitment to social and economic development and improvement of people, not just a profit-driven market for the private sector, but also the social and economic development of a people, which makes it possible for you to find people who can work, who can grow your economy, who can grow your workspace and make your targets a reality. So that's the kind of vision we want everybody to have as we kind of harness and harmonize the resources available elsewhere into one space, especially with an eye for equity.
Excellent. Partnerships are key. Giuseppina.
A lot has been said, definitely, that I absolutely agree with. I will go with diversity. In the case, especially, I want to mention Central America. Again, different realities which need a tailor-made approach, which have so much potential and definitely receptive in terms of technology and innovation in that sense. And in a situation in which there is so much importance which has been put to youth, to migration, to several issues that right now could find definitely a growth solution. Commitment to implement, that is definitely something I would highlight, which Special Advisor Garcel, I think, put it excellently. Definitely in the next year or so, it would be, fantastic to see also this partnership discuss how to act and definitely full participation and to-do list where we all participate and we all deliver. It has to be a public and shared commitment, and that's definitely something I would like to foresee between the accomplishments that I'm sure will be many.
Excellent. So leaders, listen up. Our panel suggests partnerships and diversity and the will to implement as key commitments from the summit. So with that, I would like to thank very much on behalf of the Brazilian Center for International Relations. I would like to thank the Atlantic Council for this invitation. And I would like to introduce the next moderator of the following panel, Rick Martin, reporter for Bloomberg News, who is covering trade, financial institutions, and Latin America. So thank you, everyone, and welcome, Eric.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Larissa, and thank you to the panelists from the first panel. A really interesting and stimulating conversation. Our next panel is about financial inclusion and fintech. I'd like to thank Jason and the Atlantic Council for the invitation to moderate this conversation. And we have two expert panelists to help us unpack these topics. Our first panelist is Henry Mooney, who is economics advisor at the Inter-American Development Bank and has spent his career at international financial institutions, previously working on sovereign debt and fiscal issues at the IMF, World Bank, and Morgan Stanley, as well as Laura McKenzie, who is a senior vice president for global consumer product and financial inclusion at Mastercard, where she has worked in various roles on these issues over the past 2 decades. I'd like to begin by noting that Statista research shows that the Americas is the region with the most fintech startups globally. We saw that last year, the amount raised for all startups, not just fintech, but all startups, was $16 billion in Latin America, which was more than in the previous entire decade combined. The total number of fintech startups has almost doubled since 2019 in spite of the pandemic. So Henry, I'd like to come to you first and ask you, what do you believe are the major factors that are contributing to this growth, and how can we continue, how can the region continue to maintain this momentum?
Thank you, Eric. I appreciate the introduction, and thanks for having me this afternoon. So I think it's a very interesting question, and I think the first thing that comes to mind is the concept of necessity being the mother of invention, right? I think a quick fact for those who may not realize this, Latin America is still extremely underbanked, right? Only about 55% of adults in Latin America currently have a bank account with a formal financial institution. So almost half of the population is currently unbanked, meaning they have no savings accounts with a bank. They have no access to credit through a formal financial institution. Or any of the other financial products that would make businesses or households able to save and undertake the kinds of purchases that allow them to build wealth. So I think that underscores one of the key issues that has driven this proliferation and rapid acceleration in the region. It's both responding to a need, but also responding to an opportunity, right? With half of the population not banked, the intrepid entrepreneurs in this sector see tremendous opportunity. So I think that this is these are two faces of the same coin: the necessity and the opportunity. And I think to your second question, what do we need to do? What do countries need to do in order to continue promoting this kind of progress, this kind of investment? I think the opportunity remains there, but I think soon that industry is going to run up against some challenges that have to do with the lack of connectivity, right? So I think one of the areas that our institution has focused on quite clearly and quite closely has been digital infrastructure and the ability of citizens and businesses to connect, to be online, to be able to do transactions, to be able to undertake business through what we all.
It appears we lost Mr. Mooney. So Mr. Mern, if you would like to proceed.
Sure. Laura, so we heard there before Henry was disconnected, some points made about half of Latin America currently being unbanked, necessity and opportunity, and some of the challenges related to lack of connectivity. How do you see, and can you tell us a little bit about your vision from Mastercard as to how to maintain this momentum in fintech at a time when they have some of these, when the region faces some of these challenges that Henry just mentioned?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will also take a moment, Eric, and Henry in his absence when he joined us back again, to say thank you so much. I, on behalf of myself and Mastercard, obviously very, very honored to be here and amongst such a wonderful group of co-panelists and moderators for this very, very important summit. So yes, you're absolutely right. We've heard an awful lot on the previous panels in the opener about the importance of public and private sector partnership. We here at Mastercard, right, have a very unique chair that we sit in and role that we play, and we can see into regions and into unique opportunities with a slightly different lens. And my role leading up Mastercard's global financial inclusion initiatives, I have a global purview, and therefore can see the real incredible progress and opportunity across the Latin American region, very specifically. So from our perspective, yes, digital finance is transforming rapidly. Fintechs, especially in the Latin American region, have played and are playing a vital role in financial inclusion. We've talked a little bit about the rapid growth of fintechs around the globe, but what we have seen and we've all talked about is throughout the last couple of years in Latin America in particular, there has been a boom that has only been deepened with the pandemic and the increased demand for global platforms and digital platforms. So, as we all know, the pandemic was a tipping point for digitalization for a number of very, very known and specific reasons, right? People couldn't leave their houses, right? If you can't leave your house, you can't shop, you can't buy, you can't pay your bills if you're used to going online and, going to pay your electric bill or your water bill. And there was that moment in time where people were afraid to touch. So contactless and tap technology really began to take off out of necessity. And so that was important, and we needed the enablers to step up to provide that technology, the infrastructure, the products, and also the broadband to be able to access it. And fintechs, we have seen largely go after in innovative ways spaces that perhaps traditional financial institutions and issuers, didn't historically go after, into marginalized sectors that, maybe didn't have the same revenue background. So what we've seen is that both consumers and small businesses took up the digital financial offering to access funds, to make their everyday payments on basic needs and manage expenses between their friends and family. Remittances, obviously, such a massive element of how funds are both accessed and transacted, in an underserved segment. So there's no question, the regional and the global bump to digital accelerated opportunities for bankerizing the unbanked and the underserved and moving away from cash. We looked to a report that was generated by the IDB and FIDAVISTA, and that has shown us that fintech platforms reached almost 2,500 in 2021, which was a growth of well over 100% from 2018 to 2021. So nearly a quarter of fintechs globally are actually Latin American and Caribbean. So it's 22.6% of all known fintechs globally sit and reside and do business out of and within Latin America. A lot of that growth was fueled by an increasing demand for financial services, as I mentioned earlier, that have not traditionally been provided by the traditional financial sectors into these unbanked and underserved markets. And that increased demand for those services, as well as regulatory changes to enable that, really enhance transparency, enhance security, which we heard from Special Advisor Sala earlier, and security for investors using these platforms. 36% of fintech startups polled offer solutions involving segments of the population that are totally or partially excluded from the formal financial sector. So that's really who we're trying to reach, help, improve. Importantly, financial access is one thing, but driving and improving financial health and security long-term is really the action and the objective and the goal. Our fintech portfolio in the region has seen exponential growth over the last few years as we work with those companies to not only bring them in as partners into the Mastercard network, but together achieving scale. So, the name of the game, I think, for all of us, especially in the financial sector, is how do we reach as many people as we can with as many services as we can to help improve their access, their ability to transact, their migration away from cash. So the results of that same poll I mentioned earlier show that an increase in the average of fintech initiatives where a woman, and this is important as another pillar of what we're trying to accomplish, but where a woman is a founder or a co-founder. Since the last report came out, the average of fintech firms with a woman as a founder or co-founder in the region rose from 35% in 2018 to 40% in 2020. So that's significant. So how do we all collectively not only design products and services to reach female entrepreneurs and women to create gender parity and gender equality. But who do we need to partner with to do so? So we partner often with USAID, the U.S. Agency for International Development. We have partnered specifically with them in the last year under the Women's Global Development and Prosperity Initiative to launch a program called Start Path Empoderada, which is a business accelerator focused on promoting women's entrepreneurship and financial inclusion in Colombia and Peru specifically. So we have a business model. We talk often about doing well by doing good. And so we seek to provide, we have a Start Path Accelerator program that allows and enables and brings fintechs, and especially minority-owned and women-owned fintechs, into the ecosystem to provide expertise and brand to stimulate growth and sustainability at the early stage of their startup lives. So I think I've covered a lot as a starting point, but we will engage women entrepreneurs, share access to networks, help them develop critical skills, and ultimately help these women not only succeed for themselves, but also serve as beacons for other female entrepreneurs and grow and expand it across the region.
Gotcha. Thank you so much, Laura. I think there were a lot of interesting points that you made there in terms of the role of promoting inclusivity and entrepreneurship, particularly by women in the region. You mentioned the explosive growth that we've seen overall in fintech startups for the region. Henry, I wanted to come back to you if you're reconnected with us and ask about how these initiatives can play a role in terms of fighting poverty in the region. Laura mentions the importance of remittances. We saw a recent UN report about 5 million more people now live in extreme poverty in Latin America today than in 2020. I cover the IMF, and they've highlighted the slow rebound for the region in terms of per capita income. How can digital fintech startups and these kinds of initiatives oriented around inclusivity help to reverse this trend of deepening poverty that we've seen unfold over the past couple of years of the pandemic?
Thanks, Eric. I hope you can hear me. Ironically, I think I cut out just as I was talking about the importance of digital connectivity and the lack of it in Latin America. Well, I'm sitting here in Washington, and my internet seems to have cut out for a minute. But yes, absolutely. I mean, I think as I was saying before, I think when we look at what has happened since the beginning of the pandemic, obviously countries in this region have been very severely affected by the shock. These are countries that are generally very dependent on external demand from advanced economies like the United States and elsewhere, manufacturing and services. Also, the price shocks have had tremendous impacts on lives and livelihoods. So I think when we're looking for sort of ways out of the crisis, but also looking forward to developing faster towards the future, I think, as I was saying before, fintech and digital telecommunication, digital connectivity, these are what we at the Inter-American Development Bank and our development partners across the world see as some of the clearest and most significant avenues forward, right? I think, to the point made before, anyone who had any doubts about the importance of being able to connect for the purpose of providing services, for financial transactions, for being able to do any kind of work, I think if you had any doubts, pre-crisis about how important that is, I'm sure you have realized that this is really the way things are going, and it's going much faster. I think from the financial technology perspective, as I was saying before, and I hope I made the point before I cut off, Latin America and the Caribbean in particular are unbanked. About half of the population does not have savings or access to other financial services. When you think about it, and I'm an economist, when you think about it from a development perspective, one of the key engines of growth in advanced economies that have been successful has been entrepreneurship, has been investment in sectors that are productive, has been that ability to tap financial markets in order to drive innovation and drive growth and productivity. So I think clearly when you have an economy where half of the population in one way or another, plus or minus, doesn't have access to finance, and certainly doesn't have access to some of these higher, more sophisticated tools for savings and investment, this is a clear break on development and on growth. And this is an area where we think not only progress towards, greater financial access, greater financial inclusion, but also greater digital technology and connectivity are going to be very, very important for the future. And to your point about, those populations that are excluded, I think, as Laura mentioned, all the research suggests that the more you're able to, increase and encourage participation of women, increase and encourage participation of the underbanked, even within an underbanked economy. So the marginalized, vulnerable groups, whether they are poor, rural, etc., that these can be extremely important for not only closing some gaps in terms of income disparity, but also in terms of growing the pie, the economic pie going forward. So I think that these are all related issues. And as I mentioned before, a lot of the research we have done at the IDB has focused on the region and the infrastructure gaps that exist. And we have put out research recently that shows, for relatively modest amounts of investment that has to come from both the public sector and the private sector, but for relatively modest amounts of investment, you can reap huge benefits in terms of multipliers, in terms of faster productivity, employment, and GDP growth, if you can close some of these digital infrastructure gaps that exist between countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, and, for example, advanced economies of the OECD. In the research that we put out recently, we show that you could have over the medium term double-digit improvements in GDP and productivity, and multipliers of as much as 60% in terms of cost versus benefit. So I think that those are the areas that we would focus on and that I think are most important going forward.
Thank you, Henry. We've seen our time just fly by this afternoon, so I need to ask to bring things to a close, but I wanted to ask both of you in 30 seconds or less, if you could talk about what kind of commitments you would like to see leaders make at the summit to advance financial inclusion across the Americas. Laura, if we can begin with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And it has gone very quickly. So we at Mastercard have been on this journey for a decade. We ourselves have made long-term commitments, starting with commitment we made to the World Bank in 2015 to bring 500 million unbanked people into the world's digital economy. When we met that goal in 2020, we looked ahead, saw the continued and changing nature of the issue and doubled down and increased our commitment to reach 1 billion people and bring them into the digital economy by 2025. And to that commitment, we also added additional commitments to reach 50 million migrant small businesses, and within that, 25 million women entrepreneurs. So our vision as a company is to power economies, empower people, use our talent and technology to build sustainable economy where everybody prospers. But as we move forward, I trust that everybody at the summit realizes that everybody has a role to play. None of us do this on our own, and that has come off, and I think in a number of the conversations. But governments, the private sector, the nonprofit community, the development community, each player brings different attributes and capabilities to the table. It's the time for collaboration. It's the time for partnerships. As sustainable inclusion models continue to demonstrate scalable and successful results, we really look to everybody, not only here today, but in Los Angeles in 2 weeks' time, to add us to the conversation and realize that different non-traditional players in the space that you may not historically have thought of have a role to play and are doing interesting and innovative things. I spend as much time and have learned more in the last X number of years about coffee and cocoa farming and cherries and what to do when we've started down the path of digitalization of supply chains out to smallholder farmers to drive agriculture sustainability. But we all have a role to play to go outside of our space. So we've just got some examples, 2 seconds. The UN Women's Todas Conectadas, Start Path Emprendedora I've spoken about, Mastercard Digital Allies, we work with CARE. So many, we also are partner to the Edison Alliance out of the World Economic Forum, which is focused on bringing broadband access to 1 billion people. So many different ways to connect and come together. And with that, I'll stop and thank you very much.
Thank you, Laura. Henry, you have the last word. Recommendations or in terms of things that you would like to see from the leaders meeting in Los Angeles in 2 weeks' time in terms of advancing financial inclusion?
Thanks, Eric. Very quickly, just to reiterate some of the points that I and some of the other panelists have made, I think, it will be key for governments. And I think if one thing they can do is to focus on this issue of closing digital infrastructure gaps, to creating the environment needed to enable people to transact, to be able to take advantage of new financial technologies, but also other forms of business and economic activity. And I think that that's going to be a combination of identifying gaps, understanding what needs to be done, coming up with time-bound plans with measurable, benchmarks, but also, doing more than just the physical investment, but creating the regulatory and policy environment required to catalyze that investment from the private sector, and also enabling competition and entry of new players in, for example, the financial services space. Brick and mortar banks are an old model, but I don't think that there needs to be a sense of mutually exclusive business models there. I think that there's lots of scope for old models and new models of business to coincide and coexist, and to create a bigger pie that everyone can benefit from. So I would say that that's a digital infrastructure, catalyzing the finance required, creating the enabling environment, and getting out of the way of the private sector's ability to create the kinds of services needed to close some of these gaps.
Well, thank you both so much for your time. Thank you to the Atlantic Council for the invitation. And now let me hand things over to my colleague from Bloomberg Television, Sherry An, who will moderate our next panel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Eric. That was a great conversation. We enjoyed it very much. And this is really a great transition to go from that to our next panel, which is called Digital Skills and Digital Economy. And of course, we will have the pleasure to have with us Jana Nelson, Government Digital Transformation Advisor, Amazon Web Services, Jaime Ramirez, Chief Executive Officer, Falabella. Thank you both for joining us today. We're very excited to have this conversation. Of course, everything that encompasses digital economy, the transformation post-pandemic, and of course, that includes e-commerce as well. Should we start with Jana? We have seen, of course, the OECD finding about less than 50% of Latin Americans with a level of IT competency required for professional tasks. Jana, what are you seeing when it comes to Amazon Web Services, and what steps are necessary to prepare the Latin American workforce when it comes to this new digital economy?
Well, Sherry, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be part of this conversation, and I look forward to the success of the summit in 2 weeks. At its height, we saw during the pandemic, Latin America lose about 49 million jobs. This was obviously a big concern to the governments in the region, and the labor market has recovered somewhat, but it's still not at pre-pandemic levels. The worst part, perhaps, is that the jobs that have recovered are about, on average, 70% in the informal sector. So it is very worrisome for governments all over the region, but not everything is negative. There is one sector in the economy that is hiring at an astonishing rate. The tech sector, compared to the second half of 2021 as compared to the first half, hired 286% more than what was expected when what they had done previously, and it continues to hire at a very fast clip. And the most interesting part of these jobs in the tech sector is that they're all obviously in the formal sector, but also very high-paying jobs. The challenge that the tech sector has really is human capital. It cannot find enough talent. That is true in Latin America. That is true all over. So the majority of companies, what they have done is that they've decided that the best thing for them is to train human capital for the future. And that is what Amazon Web Services is doing. That is what a lot of other companies are doing. In our case in particular, we have, we've committed to train 29 million people by 2025 in cloud skills. This is all over the world, not just in Latin America, but 29 million people will make a significant dent in the human capital dearth. And in addition to that, we have a program called Restart, which I think we have several others, but this is the most interesting one. It's a program in which a full-time 12-week program in which at the end, we actually pair people up with jobs. And in Latin America, our average graduate from Restart, which is the name of the program, mostly focused on unemployed or underemployed people, the average number of people that end up employed after these 12 weeks is 89%. So there is definitely a good story to tell. We're not the only ones doing this. All tech companies have some sort of program because it is definitely a problem. We are all hiring at a fast clip and we can't find enough people.
That is so interesting. Jaime, la misma pregunta para usted. El nivel de competencia en los sistemas de información y la tecnología informática, especialmente para trabajar en áreas profesionales. Jaime, ¿qué pasos son necesarios para preparar la fuerza laboral latinoamericana para la economía digital?
Hi, Sherry. Do you want me to do it in English or Spanish?
Oh, yeah, that would be great.
English.
What do you guys think? Because we got the instructions to do this in Spanish, but I would love to do this in English if we can. It'll be much more animated, and please feel free to respond to each other as well.
Sure. So we can do it in English if it's okay with everybody. So first of all, thank you for the invitation to the Atlantic Council. It's great to be here and sharing some of these important topics. So definitely a very important area, the job creation. What we saw that even before the pandemic, there's been a shortage, obviously, of qualified labor, particularly for technology jobs. A lot of companies here in Latin America have been hiring a lot of people, particularly software developers. And then what happened with the pandemic is that demand obviously surged a lot. Most of the e-commerce sites in the area, in the region, started hiring even more people to catch up with the demand. And as you mentioned, less than half of the population was probably prepared for this. So some of the steps, I would probably suggest a couple of things. First of all, in Latin America, there are a lot of sort of technical education tracks that have been very popular here for different types of jobs. And we need to start adapting those to cater to the software developing industry. I think it is very important to try to design shorter, probably more focused or targeted or intense programs where people can study for a couple of years, maybe just focus on a couple of languages that people know are going to be in demand. And that way we can start having more people ready for this. It is very important for universities and also for the government to work hand in hand with the companies to understand exactly what they need from these programs. I have been in the e-commerce industry for a few years now, and it is very clear what the companies need, right? They need, I don't know, for example, they need to be able to code on Python or something like that. So focus there and try to get the most out of those programs, and then also attract more people to these programs, generate more demand by offering, I don't know, scholarships or even have the companies pay for part of the education. I think that's also important, and hopefully generate more diversity as well, because right now there's not enough diversity in this industry, and this is something that could help a lot as well.
Jana, to Jaime's point as well, I mean, Jaime, you talked about a short-term sort of education system to get these people out the door and into the job that they're needed in. But Jana, you also mentioned the target of 2025, right? So I just wonder, what do you do in the meantime until you get all of these people educated? How do you fast track the process?
Well, the programs we have are 12-week programs, and people are training on the side. They've realized that there's a gap, that there's demand, and there's good salaries to be had if they get trained in a variety of different tech skills. It's not just one. And so I think people are doing it on their own. There's, they're trying to the best of their abilities, improve their economic situation. So we're not going to wait until 2025 to reach that 29 million. I mean, we're working towards it already. And I mentioned Restart, but there's a ton of different other programs, and all companies are working on this at the same time.
So Jaime, when it comes to Falabella, for example, Amazon Web Services just described how much they're investing in this because it's important. What are you doing in terms of getting, the money where your mouth is, basically?
Well, we have a couple of programs. There's actually one program called Impulsa STEM, which, as its name says, is trying to generate particularly more women coming into STEM programs, because in Latin America, it's actually really low. So some statistics show that less than 20% of people going into software development are women in Latin America, and that's something we want to change. So we're pushing hard there. We created a mentors program for them to start not only bringing in more women into their programs, but also help them change the program and adapt it to whatever it's needed in the future. So that's one of them. And then there's one called Escuela Digital, which is digital school, which also is aimed at trying to bring more tools, or particularly digital tools, to people. So these are two programs that we're currently working on to try to increase the number of people in these areas.
And Jana, of course, we have seen a substantial change in the landscape of Latin America. So perhaps we are seeing more penetration, not internet, but also mobile as well. At the same time, Jana, what should the private sector do in partnership with the government in order to really, as Jaime mentioned, not only have gender diversity and inclusivity, but really the rural access as well?
Yeah, so you're referencing connectivity, I think, and connectivity is a problem all over. I would say it's a challenge even in the United States, right? But I think that is one thing that we're going to see be disrupted in the next 5 to 10 years. We just heard the Brazilian government this weekend say that they are looking very seriously at offering a very ambitious plan to offer satellite internet to rural regions in the Amazon. So connectivity will hopefully be solved, but it's ultimately a bump in the road. It's not a blocker to digital transformation, and to allowing economies and governments to get into the digital economy. One of the things that I think is most interesting that has increases the productivity of governments, of the economy, decreases costs as well, is the digital transformation of governments. And for those who have lived in Latin America, such as myself, we've all gone through the experience of waking up really early in the morning, getting into a very long line to try to get a government ID or some sort of migration document.
Yes.
I mean, we've all been
have.
there. But so citizens are starting to wonder if they can order their food on their phone. Why can't they just interact with governments on their phone as well? And that is changing. That is changing dramatically, especially during the pandemic. It really lowered the barriers for projects that used to be aspirational. Digital IDs, online payments, online government bureaucracies in general. And we are seeing that governments have realized that this is not only their job. There's something called GovTechs. GovTechs are startups that are providing services, this kind of service for governments. And they're partnering with GovTechs all over. This is very much, not just government doing it, carrying it all in the back. And right now, I think more than ever, especially as Jason has said, this is the start of something, not the end of something. I agree with him. That right now it's the moment in time to put government in a startup mode and see a more agile government. We see this in Brazil. In Brazil, almost all government services you can access on your phone or on your computer.
Right.
At the federal, state, and municipal levels.
Yeah.
And the same in Chile or in Colombia. If you have an entrepreneurial idea, you can register your, small business on a Saturday evening. So it definitely increases productivity and decreases cost for governments.
I'm Bolivian, so we are still a little bit far off when it comes to those advances in technology. But Jaime, when it comes to Falabella, what have you seen in terms of your business penetration in different parts of the rural areas? And what are you doing to increase access?
Sure. But before that, maybe just as a follow-up to what we were just talking about, it's interesting because I had the opportunity to travel to India like about a month ago. And it's interesting what the government did there with the whole India stack. And I think the Latin American governments can follow suit and try to do some stuff that's similar to that. As Jenna was saying, access to government, processes and stuff like that. So I think there are other countries that have done this before, and I think we have a lot to learn. Now, in terms of what we've done as a company, I don't know if people know, but we have been transforming Falabella from more of an e-commerce site, where falabella.com was mostly the e-commerce site for our retailers, right? Falabella, Sodimac, and all that. And then since last year, we actually transformed Falabella into a real marketplace, so an open marketplace, because we saw that particularly during the first year of the pandemic, there was a huge demand from entrepreneurs to really get online, to find new markets, to start selling their products, right? Because obviously at the quarantines, they couldn't sell their product, particularly in the physical world. And therefore we opened up our marketplace. And we have been working really hard in trying to attract those entrepreneurs and small businesses and offer them a channel to really expand their market. So we have been developing tools, logistical aspects as well. And that's where we think we can start making a big change, right? So providing people with the tools, and particularly a small business, a small entrepreneur, so they can access either the entire market in the country, and why not, as a next step, even access the entire region, right? So an entrepreneur in Chile can then start selling in Colombia or in Mexico or in Peru or in many other countries. So it's a way of expanding their markets as well. And we feel that's something that could make a big difference.
This panel has just gone so fast that we actually need to wrap it up, but I will give you a question each. The vision when it comes to creating an ecosystem that, as Jaime, you mentioned, would perhaps have that interactive dynamic with other countries and other markets as well. But what does the government need to do in order to foster this? Perhaps more government regulation without fostering innovation. What are you seeing?
Sarah, sure. It's to me or to Jaina? Or
yes, Jaime, go ahead.
To me, okay. Well, I guess in Latin America, the government should start playing a kind of a leading role in some of these aspects, right? The thing that's important is to find the right balance where regulation should at the same time protect, obviously, consumer rights, which is something that's critical in the region, but also at the same time, as you mentioned, it has to foster innovation, right? It has to create the right environment for companies, either local or multinational companies in the region, to continue investing in developing new products, new services, right? Because in the end, that's what's important. And if these products are successful, then people will also have something to gain out of it. So it's important to find that balance between both worlds.
And Jana, what are you seeing?
I think we're seeing governments more and more aware of the newness of technology, and it doesn't necessarily have to be regulated all the time. Some of it needs to be, but also a recognition from even the governments themselves that in this newness comes a lack of knowledge of how these things can affect citizens. And so they're working very closely with private sector. I see governments very open to working with private sector and civil society organizations, as they should, with finding the best ways really to respond to this. But I think what is most interesting to me as a digital optimist, I would say, is what's in the future, right? We're seeing very interesting conversations in the Bahamas and the Eastern Caribbean on central bank digital currency, which has already been implemented. Brazil's going to do it in 2023. We see a lot in terms of digital justice in Argentina in particular, trying to help solve blockers, trying to make government work, trying to make government provide better customer service. And we're seeing countries look to technology to solve one of their biggest problems, which is revenue, by using technology to improve tax collection, in particular for those who are tax evaders. So I do see very positive trend lines, governments in general working with the private sector and with civil society to find the best way to if needed, regulate, but they're not coming at this with a regulating approach.
Okay.
So.
In order not to stifle innovation.
Yeah.
Jana, Jaime, it was really great talking to you both. Thank you so much. This panel just flew by. We'll send it back to Diego.
Thank you, Sherian, and thanks again to all our excellent moderators and panelists. Special Advisor Mukarsel Powell started us off with by highlighting the opportunities for the United States as host of the summit in both June and throughout the following year. Here at the Adrian Ash Latin America Center, we also look forward to continuing the conversation on regional collaboration in Los Angeles at the 9th Summit of the Americas. The discussion we heard today offers bold new ideas for creating more equitable and sustainable economic growth through increasing access to digital tools, strengthening financial inclusion, and expanding infrastructure for e-commerce and the digital economy. We look forward to our next event in the lead up to the summit and want to welcome any students, academics, and young professionals to join us at our summit office hour session this Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. This session will also focus on digital access and financial inclusion, and participants will be able to ask questions directly to our panelists, which include representatives from Mastercard and the Bureau of Cyberspace and Digital Policy. My colleague, Willow Fortunov, will be sharing the registration link in the chat, and we look forward to continuing these conversations prior to and following the Summit of the Americas. And with that, I will close us out. Thank you for joining.